Rainbow Bright to meet you. Rainbow Bright? Who's she? She's my friend. She's beautiful.
Remember when you could just play with your Rainbow Bright and not have to worry about getting shot at or beat up? Oh, those were the good days. JK, the 80s weren't safe. You might not think it when you look outside, but crime over the last decade is actually lower than it was back in the late 80s and early 90s. Although that's changed over the past couple years as crime is ticking back up all over the place. The latest Global Peace Index was released for 2021, and the US ranks 121st of the 163 biggest nations. We're actually just about as dangerous as Azerbaijan and Burkina Faso, which is pathetic. You know, with all the hate crimes and mass shootings and gang activity and just all around BS. So after a big drop in 2015, crime levels in the US are tracking back up again. 2020 and 2021 were both super bad for crime in many cities across the US. Some of that was because of COVID. Some was from a hangover that came from all those riots. Part of the uptick is because criminals are emboldened more now than ever. Police officers are quitting, cops are being defunded, and in many communities, law enforcement's letting crimes go, or they're not engaging with dangerous individuals because of the possible fallout, and that's just too bad. Well, sadly, more criminals have taken back some of our streets again, which is just terrible. And that's one reason why so many people are fleeing large metro areas, looking for a more peaceful life. But be careful, because some of the places that you think might be cheaper and more rural are not necessarily safer. That's right. Some of the places we're going to talk about are the most dangerous places in the country. Let's get started as we go through the most dangerous states in 2021. Why do they cause problems so much? Is it poverty and all that booze and drugs and jobs and boredom and no family they can call on? We start off with the 10th most dangerous state in the nation, here in Arizona. What? Arizona? That might be a bit of a surprise, but it's true. While the murder rate in Arizona is somewhat in line with the rest of the nation, other types of violent crimes like rapes and robberies and assaults are more common here in Arizona than they are nationwide. The most dangerous part of Arizona is going to be Phoenix metro area by far. But despite the really high crime numbers in Phoenix, people are moving here in large numbers. It's actually right at the top when you look at the fastest growing metro areas. A lot of the people moving here are former Californians looking for a refuge from all the liberal policies. Phoenix has seen the number of assaults within its city limits double since 2016, even though robberies are down. But robberies are down nationwide since more people are working from home these days. And we've all heard plenty about defunding the police. And there's a general perception that liberal cities are cutting police budgets. While the 50 biggest cities in the country did cut their police budgets by 5% total, more liberal cities actually increased their police budgets this year than reduced them. So yay, there's hope. They haven't completely lost their minds. Phoenix is one such large Democrat city that increased its police budget last year. In fact, all the places above this line are Democrat cities that increased their police budgets. Tampa increased its police budget the most, and all the cities below the line cut their police budgets. Austin, Texas cut a whopping 33% from its police budget in the last year, despite the fact that Austin saw the largest increase in homicides of any other U.S. city. However, it's worth noting that Austin's crime rate is still way lower than most other large U.S. cities.
It's better to own a gun and not need it than need a gun and not own it. Hi, folks. Don from Don's Guns. You know, it's getting dangerous out there. The criminals got guns. The honest people should have them. And they are not that expensive at Don's Guns. $119.99 for a .380 automatic.
You better have some good protection if you plan on living in some parts of Oklahoma. I'll tell you that, mister. While the chances of being robbed in Oklahoma are lower than many other states, the incidences of rape and murder and assaults is far higher than the U.S. average. This was the 9th most dangerous state for 2021, Oklahoma was. A lot of the most dangerous places in Oklahoma are going to be places you haven't heard of before unless you're from here. Smaller cities and towns with less than 30,000 people. But Tulsa is the most dangerous city in Oklahoma overall. Tulsa ranks as the nation's 23rd most dangerous city. But over the last year or so, murders are down here, so that's good. They've taken thousands of guns off the streets here as part of an anti-gang effort, as they have nationwide. They're taking guns off the streets. But police departments across the country are fighting a losing battle ever since all the rioting went down in 2020. there's been a record number of gun sales to first-time gun buyers. For a lot of 2020, you might remember, ammo was really hard to come by. One guy said his gun store had a run like he'd never seen before. It was just an avalanche of new gun buyers for the first time. Can't blame us. As crime continues to go up across the country and we see how tough it is for the cops to keep up, more of us are taking protection into our own hands. It's also worth noting that Oklahoma has the second highest incarceration rate of all states too. A lot of other states have reduced the number of people in prisons, but not here in Oklahoma, and they have a much higher rate than average for people in prison for non-violent crimes too. A whopping 1 in 6 Oklahoma kids has had at least one parent in prison. Can you imagine? 1 in 6 kids in this state has had a parent locked up? What the hell, Oklahoma? And what's super sad is 1 in 14 kids nationwide has had a parent in prison at some point. And I'm not talking about an overnight stay for a DUI either. What the hell's going on, America? So do tough policies actually reduce or prevent crime then? I mean, if there's so many people locked up in Oklahoma, the crime is really high, what good does locking people up do? There are studies that show that people imprisoned are more likely to commit a crime when they get out of prison. What do you think? How do we keep people from committing crimes if prison doesn't work like it should? Well, you think about that. But for now, we're off to Missouri. Now, if you live here, you know this state has a bunch of issues with crime. Missouri has the second highest murder rate of all states, and St. Louis is a joke when it comes to the sheer number of crimes. It's either the worst U.S. city for crime or second to Detroit, depending on what publication you read. Over the past 4 years, violent crime has skyrocketed in St. Louis. We all knew that already. It's become a symbol of urban decay here. The mayor is soft on crime. The prosecutor is a social justice warrior. Remember the McCluskeys? That St. Louis couple that had to defend their own homes because nobody else was around? A lot of people were scared by that because there was a fear it was the beginning of a new era when cops weren't going to be around for personal protection. The north end of St. Louis is a war zone, but it's not just the St. Louis metro area that's bad. Springfield's terrible. Kansas City's terrible. And then they have all these little small towns all over Missouri that have a big problem with robberies and meth heads. And Missouri statistics don't even take into account East St. Louis, which is in the St. Louis metro area, but it's across the river in Illinois. This city of 26,000 people has the highest murder rate in the nation, even higher than St. Louis. There's been more than 400 murders here in the last 10 years, and 75% of them went unsolved. And 2/3 of kids in this city live in poverty. It's just tragic here. Now we're going to be in the deep south for quite a while now as we come to Alabama, the 7th most dangerous state in 2021. Alabama is the nation's 7th poorest state. It also has the nation's 7th highest murder rate. Alabama is also 7th worst for violent crime, and it's 10th worst for robberies. Folks here have a 1 in 200 chance of being the victim of a violent crime every year, but clearly that number goes up as you get into Alabama's notoriously bad hotspots for crime. Statistically, it's smaller communities with the highest crime rates per capita in Alabama, but the bigger cities like Montgomery and Birmingham have all the headline-grabbing tales of murder and mayhem. I have a good friend named Jose Rodriguez who runs Southern Life on YouTube. He left Alabama and moved to Florida because of the crime. How much of it has to do with poverty, do you think?
Very little. I think it has to do with people being hateful and envious, and the culture of gun violence is just part of the culture there. I don't think it has to do with necessity. I'm from a place in Cuba that's extremely poor, where food is not guaranteed every day, and there's no violence there. I mean, it's not human nature just because you're poor to be violent. I think a lot of it's cultural.
Tell people about what happened. Do you want to talk about what happened when you got shot at when you were driving through? I think you were in Montgomery.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they were shooting at me. I think in that occasion there was a shootout, which happens every freaking weekend. On Friday night, everything pops off at once, so it overwhelms the cops. So basically, you know, all the shootings and drive-bys and all that, they do it either Saturday night or Friday night, and it just overwhelms the cops so they can get away with it. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time on that occasion. But, you know, if you're driving in the wrong neighborhood, you can definitely get shot at. And again, it's a state where if somebody shoots at you, it's not going to be investigated as a crime. So it's like, did you get hit? No, you didn't, and keep it moving, you know?
Alarm. Hit the alarm. What's going on? The keypad. I'll check the keypad. It's the back door. Get by the phone.
Hello?
This is Jim from Brinks Home Security. Is everything all right?
I don't know. The alarm just started going off.
You better have a solid alarm system in place if you're going to live in parts of South Carolina. I'll tell you that. Statistically, South Carolina ranks number 6 for violent crimes and has the 3rd highest rate of robberies and arson in the nation. Again, a lot of the criminal hotspots per capita are going to be smaller cities with less than 20,000 people. Florence and Darlington, they're a real mess up in the northern part of the state. Myrtle Beach is crazy with shootings and robberies, although a lot of that happens when tourists flock into town and cause problems. Same goes for North Charleston. South Carolina's 5th in the nation for murder rates per capita. In fact, 5 of the 10 worst states for murder are in the Deep South. Why are the murder rates so much higher in the Deep South? Poverty, poor education, and warm weather mostly. At least that's what the theory is. A young black man between the ages of 15 and 24 has a 1 in 1,000 chance of being murdered every year, and most likely by a handgun. Black men and boys have a 20 times higher chance of dying by gunfire than white men and boys. Young black men are 2% of the population, but made up 37% of gun homicides last year.
Where are their parents?
That's a good question, Mappy. I found this chart from the census, which shows that 3 in 10 single parents is black. However, the black population is only 15% of the nation's total population, so clearly there's an issue with good family structure in black households. Whoa, whoa, whoa! Put the guns away, you guys! Damn! Can't we just have a conversation without the guns getting drawn? Nappy?
No.
Hey! What is going on here?
My God, it's like shootings everywhere on this channel. Keep the guns out of it. Despite the high crime rate, South Carolina has an incarceration rate that's far lower than most other states. So some of the dangerous states have a high number of people locked up, and some have low prison populations. Interesting. But talk about a high prison rate. Louisiana has the most people locked up per capita. It's not even close. And Louisiana has the highest murder rate of all states, and that's not even close. 2021 was the 31st year in a row that Louisiana had the most murders per capita. What the damn hell? The New York Times speculates it's poverty, jobless rates, and a high dropout rate, which contribute to a high murder rate. That makes sense. Again, the question is locking people up helping or hurting crime rates? One study in Scientific American says sticking somebody in prison had no effect on their chances of committing a crime later in life. So does that just mean some people are just terrible and there's no penalty that'll keep them under control? If that's the case, then what's the alternative to prison? I say we just put these criminals on a ship and we send them to an island with no TV. That's not ever going to happen, Super Gay Cop. I don't know if there's a boat big enough for all the criminals, nor do I know of an island that would take them. Clearly, crime and poverty are inversely related. Louisiana is also the second poorest state overall. Many of Louisiana's worst criminal hotspots are going to be smallish cities located in a line along I-49, places like Opelousas, Alexandria, and Natchitoches. New Orleans is a terrible place for crime as well. It was the 4th deadliest city in America a year ago, and it's not getting any better. Baton Rouge is also terrible for crime, but you knew that already. Tennessee was the 3rd most violent place in the nation in 2021. Tennessee is the 4th worst place for crime, and last year it was the 3rd most violent place in the nation. Crime here went up in 2020, and 2021 was no different. This past year was the deadliest in Tennessee in 20 years. 10 people get raped every day in Tennessee, which is just terrible. If there's a bright spot in Tennessee, juvenile arrests were down, as well as were DUIs and domestic violence. So that's good. Nashville was the state's 6th most violent place per capita. And there's a bunch of other smaller places here on the eastern side of the state that have a big problem with assaults and drug use. But a lot of Tennessee's issues are here in Memphis. They had 186 murders in 2021. Again, most of them involving guns. Memphis is 5 times more dangerous than the average American place, but parts of Memphis are way worse than that. Depending on the year, Memphis is usually in the top 3 for crime every year. People here have a 1 in 90 chance of being the victim of a violent crime and a 1 in 25 chance of being robbed. So you're down in Memphis, you see these people. What are they doing all day long instead of working?
If you want me to be totally honest with you, just laying around. I mean, unless they're doing drugs or something they shouldn't be doing. They're just collecting the government checks and calling it a day.
You seem like a good guy. Did you grow up in Memphis?
Yes, sir.
So you clearly are a smart guy that has it figured out. A lot of people in your city don't. What did you do different that they did not do?
I just changed my mindset, you know. I actually came from one of the worst neighborhoods in the city, South Memphis. And if you live there, you know what I'm talking about. And I just, instead of getting involved in the drugs and crime and stuff, got my education and decided to work for a living.
How do the parents deal with all this stuff? Do you just keep your kids inside, locked inside at night, or what?
They don't do anything. They just let kids do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm. We're going right next door to Arkansas, which continues its run as being one of the worst places in the nation for criminal behavior. This state had the nation's 5th highest murder rate. It's also the 5th poorest. It has the 5th highest number of robberies. And get this, it had the 5th most people locked up in prison. Again, we're seeing the same patterns. Little Rock, the state capital, is far and away the most dangerous place in the state. West Memphis, which is west of Memphis, is also a terrible place. And then there's Pine Bluff, which people call Crime Bluff. It's so bad here for crime, they don't even report their numbers to the FBI. So we don't know exactly how bad Pine Bluff was this year, but trust me, it's terrible. Not too long ago, it had a higher murder rate than every place in America except Detroit. And traditionally, Pine Bluff has had a murder rate 7 times higher than the U.S. average. Pine Bluff and many other parts of Arkansas are just falling into disrepair. Jobs are leaving, people are leaving, the schools are terrible, and in many Arkansas communities, gang warfare and drugs make it dangerous for people out on the streets at night, as well as those caught in the middle of all the chaos, just regular people. This year, Arkansas's governor, Asa Hutchinson, signed into law a controversial stand your ground law. So now, people can defend themselves if their lives are in danger. Prior to that bill, an Arkansas resident was legally mandated to walk away from a dangerous confrontation. The stand your ground law is popular among gun owners who want to protect themselves. It's controversial because sometimes it leads to more shootings and deaths. I mean, how do you determine if somebody really feels their lives are threatened or not? Sometimes it's very clear. Sometimes it's not.
McGruff here. See that guy? He's stealing that bike. Now, see that lady? She's calling the cops. Mimi Marth.
Whatever happened to McGruff? Did he just retire? Did he give up? Well, hopefully you have a neighborhood watch group if you live in New Mexico, because it's downright overwhelming in many parts of this state. It's twice as violent here in New Mexico as it is in the average state. There's more assaults here than any other state, and that's not even close. New Mexico also leads the nation in car thefts and robbery rates. What the hell is going on in New Mexico? Gallup is statistically the most dangerous place in the state, and there's a bunch of other smallish places you've never heard of with sky-high crime rates. Albuquerque doesn't always report on its crimes, but when it does, it's ugly. This year, Albuquerque's murder rate was 75% higher than the previous 2 years. And a lot of these assaults and robberies and shootings in Albuquerque are drug-related and happen in hotels and motels. One cop said young people are getting together to sell a small amount of drugs and guns. And they meet up somewhere, and then one party robs the other party, and pretty soon there's a shooting. New Mexico's location doesn't help. It's right on the Mexico border, and there's large north-south highways here, which make it a hub for a variety of interstate drug activity. It also doesn't help the state has a 20% poverty rate and the nation's lowest graduation rate. Get this, 1 in 4 kids in New Mexico never finished high school in 2021, and you can't blame COVID for that. It may or may not be a shocker to hear that Alaska was the most dangerous state in the nation this year. Alaska doesn't have the same type of characteristics that other states on this list have. It's not on the Mexico border. It's not in the south. The poverty rate here is the 13th lowest in the U.S. The prison rate's the 12th lowest. It's not hot here, and there aren't a lot of gangs. But still, violent crimes here in Alaska are by far the highest in the nation, and robberies are the 4th highest. So why Alaska? Well, a lot of the communities up here are just far away from each other, and it makes it hard for police to respond to violence. And it's also way easier to get away with crimes up here. I mean, good luck finding a body out here in these parts, right? Often way out here, people take matters into their own hands with no law enforcement anywhere close. And it's really bad in Alaska's remote villages, where it's almost every man for himself. And a lot of the problems are domestic. A staggering 60% of women in Alaska have experienced violence, and a lot of that's in their own homes. Alaska leads the nation in rapes and in domestic violence, and is way up there for alcohol and drug abuse too. It's a frontier mentality up here, with a lot of end-of-the-roaders who flee from their personal problems in other parts of the country. So you have a really high concentration of troubled people without a lot of supervision. Will Alaska ever be safe? Will the other troubled hotspots we talked about ever figure it out? Probably not. These states have been at the top of these type of lists for a long time now. Outside of a few exceptions, they are very violent and dangerous because they are very poor and uneducated. If we can solve those problems, we can expect to see a drop in crime rates, but that's a topic for another video. Now, where were the safest states in 2021? They'd be places like Vermont and New Hampshire and Maine. In Vermont, there were only 10 murders total last year. That's what Chicago gets in a weekend. But why is this part of the Northeast so safe? Well, folks up here are less likely to live in poverty and in inner city environments. The dropout rates are really low up here, and you have less gang activity. Maybe they don't like the cold. I don't know. But bad people stay away from this part of the country. If you can stand the cold and want a much safer place to raise kids, the upper Northeast is the place to be. But seriously, can the idiots all stop shooting their guns and robbing and stealing? That'd be nice. Yours truly, honest, normal Americans. Dangerous, so dangerous, dangerous, so damn dangerous. Yeah. Why do these places have to be so criminally challenged? Why do they cause problems so much? Is it poverty and all that? Booze and drugs and jobs and boredom and no family they can call on? Hey guys, so if anything I just talked about upset you or made you sad or mad, well then do something about it. Call your local leaders and demand change. Chip in and help those in need. Make your community better, because communities don't get better without hard work and determination. America's a great place. It just needs some more love and pride.
This is Sage, Nick's manager. This has been a Corner House Entertainment production.
And are you looking to move and need advice? I do consulting. That's right. I'll sit down and talk about where the next perfect place for you and your family should be. I do it all the time. Together, let's find you a new home that's safe and checks all your boxes. You can get my email in the description to find out how I can help you find your perfect relocation. Tennessee is like the fourth most dangerous states when you add up everything from property crime to robberies and assaults and murders. And Memphis is a big reason Tennessee is so dangerous. You live in Memphis, Josh. Can you give people an idea on how dangerous it is in Memphis?
It's pretty dangerous here. We have everything from murders to interstate shootings to really bad drug problems to street racing, everything.
Yeah. Why? What's the problem? What is there a reason why it's so bad there?
It's just a lack of jobs, bad schools, political corruption, and people just don't want to change.
If you were in charge, what would you do, Josh, to clean up the crime in Memphis?
I believe the first thing I would do is I would look at some of these old neighborhoods and reach out to those people and see what they actually want done to their neighborhoods instead of just going down there and building stuff.
Mm-hmm. Like what would the neighborhoods need done so that the crime would go down?
Grocery stores, banks, new housing.
Grocery stores and banks would make people stop.
We'll put more jobs in the area.
Okay, so more jobs and then people. I get you. Okay, so more jobs, people have opportunity to make some money. They can stay off the streets, stay busy, build a life, all that.
Yes, sir.
You know, I agree. My concern or the alternative to that is there's plenty of jobs now. They can't hire enough people. I mean, you go down to Burger King and Chick-fil-A and Food Lion and, you know, the help wanted all over the place. People just don't want to work.
That is true for the vast majority.
When does it really get very active with criminal activity in Memphis?
It's always really active. But I guess the most active, it will be on holidays. New Year's, 4th of July.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, instead of getting involved in the drugs and crime and stuff, got my education and decided to work for a living.
Yeah. And then you had friends on your block that did not do that.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Do you still keep in touch with them? Do you see them around town? Or they like, what's going on, Josh? How you doing?
Yeah, I still talk to them. I still hang with them, but you keep them at a distance.
Why is that?
Just, you know, they're cool to talk to, but when you know that they're going to do something messed up, you don't want to go with them because you'll get involved with them most likely.
Yeah, stay out of trouble. Stop running around with the wrong crowd.
That's the thing about Memphis. If you don't look for trouble, it doesn't come looking for you most times. Most times.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, I get you. Yeah, I mean, it's clearly one of the worst places for crime in the country, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any better. You know, do you have any stories about the crime that?
Yes, back in, I believe, summer of 2019, there was a shooting in the neighborhood of Fraser. I used to live in that neighborhood right across the street from my old house. The man had shot a police officer. They had shot him, and the neighborhood had started rioting and looting. And CNN came out there. It was just a big mess.
And it was the officer at fault for the shooting?
No, the man was a drug dealing really bad.
Mm-hmm. Do parents? Yeah, I'd imagine. Yeah, I just read a study that single parents are a huge problem and a huge part of this. You know, kids start gangbanging and running around with the wrong crowd at 7, 8 years old, and then by the time they're 18, they're checked out of school, checked out of life. They got it all figured out, and then it catches up with them. So. Yeah. Are you going to leave Memphis? Do you care? I mean, are you, is the crime going to deter you, or are you just going to stick around and just make a life there?
I don't really see any reason to leave. I mean, if the crime doesn't come to you, which most times it doesn't, you're pretty much cool. So I'm probably going to stay here.
All right. Good for you, man. Where's the most dangerous place you've lived?
Cuba, for sure. I mean, Cuba's dangerous because it's a different type of government, you know?
What about in the U.S.?
Louisville, Kentucky was pretty crappy. But I'll be honest, in Louisville, Kentucky, and Montgomery, Alabama, have been two crappy places to live, I can tell you that much. Louisville, Kentucky, and Montgomery, Alabama. In Louisville, you had to deal with gangs, but you had your own gang. Like, because Louisville's a very diverse city. So you had, like I was Cuban, you could have Cubans to back you up. But in Montgomery, Alabama, bro, I had nobody to back me up. Like, literally, I had one situation where somebody robbed me, and I was like, well, if I let them keep robbing me, they're going to keep robbing me, so I got to go and at least make some type of presence and let them know I'm not going to put up with it. It was me against 300 people, so, like, you know, I think Montgomery, Alabama was a pretty crappy place to live.
Yeah, I know. I've been there. It's terrible. It's sad.
Like, that street you were on, the street where I ran into that shootout, you were on that street. You did a video there. Like, just like...
Oh, that was the same street?
Yeah, you were on that same street. The same street where that shooting was, yeah.
Okay. It's the street I'm showing right now, yeah. You know, a lot of people may not realize Alaska is so dangerous for criminal behavior, but it's actually the most dangerous place you can live in the country. Did you experience any of that? Like, is it truly dangerous? Was it just rough and rowdy people in Alaska? Like, what's the deal?
Well, I think there's some component of, like, in the urban setting, there would be crime in the typical ways, I guess. And I think that was largely confined to the areas of town, like the lower income parts of town. And I didn't live quite in one of those, but kind of adjacent. And you'd hear gunshots in the night pretty frequently. But I never experienced anything personally or really knew anyone. I knew some people I knew from high school that I wouldn't say I was friends with, but I was like acquainted with, were involved in that sort of thing. And it's not difficult to find, I guess. I think another big component is, especially in the more rural areas, the isolation and alcoholism, and propensity of the average Alaskan to own guns. that combo is a factor.
So it's a bunch of people way out in the wilderness with guns and booze. That's a big factor in why so many people are shot.
Not that would cause anyone to commit violent crimes, but if you were going to anyway, it's not helping.
Right. Yeah. Is it really bad is it worse in like the metro areas like Anchorage, or is it like worse like if you get like 2 hours outside of that when it's just like little towns of like 200 people and it's like 20 minutes between towns and you're like out in the middle of nowhere?
I think, well, there's a bit of a bell curve because when the community gets small enough that everyone knows everyone, I think it's less common. But like out in the Matsu Valley, a little bit north of Anchorage, where it's much less populous than Anchorage, but definitely not a small town, it's way more prevalent. So I think it could be a bit of both, but I guess for different reasons.
So here's what's interesting. So like you have a state like Arkansas, which is like the third most dangerous place statistically, that has some really bad areas. And somebody may say, well, I don't want to move to Arkansas because it's really dangerous there, which it is. And even in the small towns, it's a lot of drugs and just fist fights and robberies. Or you could say, you go to Alaska where it's even more dangerous, but some people might be like, well, I don't really feel like I would feel unsafe in Alaska for criminal behavior. Is it just like an isolated thing that there's only 800,000 people there, so the crime tends to stand out more? Or would a family that moved there feel like, oh my God, there's sketchy people and there's criminals and like, you know what I mean?
I think only if they moved into certain parts of Anchorage, like there's the standard gang activity and petty crime inside of Anchorage. And I guess a large portion of violent crime in rural areas is domestic. I think going back to the alcohol and isolation. But I don't think you would go to a less populous town and be off-put thinking you're in a dangerous place. Does that make sense?
Is Alaska racist? If a black family moved to a small town of 2,000 people, would they be harassed?
No, the state's actually fairly more diverse than average. I couldn't pull anything off the top of my head, but they told us all sorts of stats like that in school. However, there is a decently widespread negative sentiment against the native people. Like there's a stereotype of drunk homeless people like panhandling on the side of the road being native primarily, which like by the numbers is the case. Not that that's a causal relationship in any way, but you do see it a lot. And a large portion of that also are people who come from the villages into Anchorage and then take up that lifestyle that I couldn't tell you why, but it happens a lot. But overall, I think in general, racially, they're pretty accepting.
So you just left Anchorage a month ago. You moved to Utah. Are you ever going to go back? And I guess, why did you leave? And are you going to go back?
Mostly I got a sweet job that's in line with my career ambitions, pays extremely well. and I like the outdoor activities here. I don't think I'd see myself moving back, really, because my career prospects are not as good back home, and the outdoor recreation, as far as my taste, is better here. However, I wouldn't plan on it, but it would be a nice thing to have in the pocket, to have like a ski cabin or like a chill vacation home somewhere out there. Because if you wanted to raise a family and not have anyone get in your business at all, perfect place for that.
What would you tell the average family that's sitting there trying to figure out where the hell they want to go? Mom and dad are going, there's always Alaska. We like the outdoors and we like the isolation and we can work from home and we have some money saved. What would you tell that average family that's thinking about maybe moving up there to Alaska?
I think if they want to and they have a solid plan, go for it, because the independence, I guess, or the factor of not having anyone messing with you and you wanting to be there, I think really is enough. I think if you've made it that far in your plan and it's that developed, there aren't going to be too many big surprises.
What would be the top 3 things on your plan if you were going to give somebody advice for people to know if they're thinking about moving to Alaska?
It's a good question. And I think you got to really deeply know that you're into the kind of more homesteader vibe of having your own physical location and doing stuff yourself, especially because if you're anywhere but Anchorage, it'll take a while for a plumber or what. I mean, not necessarily, but as a general rule, it'll take longer for that sort of thing to get to you.
Okay, so you got to be kind of handy and willing
somewhat
to
self-sufficient.
Somewhat self-sufficient. Okay. Yeah. Got it.
And you've got to enjoy either the nothing happening around you or outdoor stuff, because there's nothing else, speaking generally. And you've got to be okay with it being a long journey to go anywhere else, because it's a minimum of 3 hours to Seattle plus wherever you go from there. And there's no way around that.
Okay, so like those are things to consider once you're there. Yeah, like I'm thinking more of like a plan to get there, like to move there. Like those are good ideas too. But like, my plan is to move to Alaska. What 3 things should I know to get there, and where, in terms of like where I could live, or like the type of home I should get, or
I guess like transportation wise, you've got to either fly or drive the Alcan, neither of which would be fun with all of your moving stuff, because the Alcan's at least, or there are 2 highways that go up. The Alcan's one of them, and it's kind of depending on the season or where you're coming from. You could take one or the other. But anyway, driving takes forever. It's like 3 days minimum if you're not stopping. And the road is, I wouldn't say poorly maintained, but it's not perfectly smooth. So you got to have 4-wheel drive, usually recommended, and you got to be prepared to take care of any unexpected stuff that comes up with your vehicle. Or if you're shipping or flying stuff, it'll be really expensive. Then in Anchorage, you could definitely call a plumber or whatever. But if you're living anywhere outside of the city, you got to be prepared for the self-sufficiency.